Well, in order to achieve some of the goals that I've set out with regard to preventing and mitigating problems related to the Marcellus shale drilling, I've introduced several pieces of legislation which I'll just briefly describe. One, obviously, is the moratorium bill, giving us time to enact the legislation that I believe is necessary. A second one is a 2,500-foot buffer around our public water supplies that provide public drinking water and bathing and water to all of our constituents. Current law requires a 100-foot buffer, which is clearly inadequate. I've also introduced House Resolution 864, which urges Congress to pass the FRAC Act. The Halliburton loophole exempts the gas and oil companies from the Clean Water Act. Unacceptable. They need to be included in that law and regulation. Another bill that I've introduced would track the frack water, the wastewater from the fracking process. As it leaves the well site and has been used, it would track the water through manifests to wherever it ends up. My fear is that because of the cost of hauling this water long distances for cleanup, that it's being dumped. And we can't prove that it isn't being dumped. The only way to prove that is to track it. And so that's another one of my pieces of legislation. Another concern of mine is drilling in the floodplain. Obviously, most of my district was underwater in 1972. And again, flooding in 2006. The heavy rains that we've had give rise to questions about whether the pits that hold the frack water and the residue are deep enough. Would a heavy rain cause them to overflow? And if you were in a floodplain, if there was a drilling site in the floodplain, would the frack water just bubble up from the ground and become part of the floodwater and contaminate all of the land in the floodplain? Those are issues of grave concern to my constituents. There has been an application to the PUC that would give the gathering lines that go from the wells into the major pipelines to distribute the natural gas. These companies have applied for public utility status. I've co-sponsored a bill that would say the PUC can regulate the safety and reliability of those lines, but does not give the utility companies public utility status, which would give them eminent domain. Another bill would put in place the appropriate law and regulation to protect the water supply by enacting Pennsylvania American Water Company's concerns, putting into place some of the things that they're concerned about that would mitigate any damage to their water supply. Notification of the water company if there's a drilling permit that's about to be issued that they feel would threaten their water supply. Having on-site emergency response information and equipment on-site to quickly stop any spread of the frack water or the materials contaminating a public water supply. And those are just some of the bills. You know that we're talking about a severance tax. My concern is that we do a severance tax with no concessions to the oil and gas companies with regard to preemption of local ordinances or forced pooling. I don't believe that people should have to enter into leases or their property should be usurped in any way by forced pooling and eminent domain. And we need to be diligent in making sure that any severance tax passes without those provisions. But again, there is lots of legislation that's been proposed that needs to be put in place, but it takes time to do that. So we need a moratorium now.